Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Good day, everyone. In this occasion, me, Gina Harun, will present my paper about the formation of Argentina accounting standard at the accounting theory subject. So for the first phase of the paper is introduction. In introduction, we have background and the problem we gonna express in this paper. So as a background, an accounting standard, as well as all know, is a set of fundamental rules and processes that govern financial accounting policies and practices. Accounting standards are used by banks, investors, and regulatory authorities to verify that information about the company is relevant and correct. And then accounting standard will be encountered at all levels of a firm in their broadcast sense. They'll probably start with internal reporting and presentation standard to guarantee that the information required about the company operation matches the company's needs and is consistent. In the other hand, we will come across international accounting standards such as IFRS, as we all know, International Financial Reporting Standard, and or GAAP, like we know that it's General Accepted Accounting Principle. These accounting standards were developed in response to their demands of the international financial sector for standardized accounting reporting that can be relied for the consistent information presentation. The GAAP accounting standards were created mostly in the United States, whereas the IFRS accounting standard were developed primarily in Europe. The International Financial Reporting Standard (IFRS) are becoming increasingly widely adopted. Like we know in Indonesia also adopted the IFRS too. In between, we'll come across accounting rules produced by various countries and tailored to smaller jurisdictions. Most nations, on the other hand, are rapidly mandating and adopting GAAP or IFRS as accounting standard for reporting firm performance. For each nation on the whole has its own agency or authorities in charge of setting accounting standards. These agencies are governed by laws, therefore, their decisions are binding in their respective countries. For example, in the United States, they have the Financial Accounting Standard Board is on their charge. So in the United Kingdom, they have Financial Reporting Council, which consists of 6 institutions or 6 bodies in its charge. The Australian Accounting Standard Board is responsible for the Australia, while the External Reporting Board is responsible in New Zealand. So in our main topic to this paper is Argentina. So the Argentina also has a professional accounting guidelines produced by the Argentine Federation of Professional Councils in Economic Science, or we call it FACPCA, and they follow international financial reporting standards, as most the other nations do. This article or this paper will explain and detail how the International Financial Reporting Standard or IFRS are implemented, as well why Argentina chose to employ IFRS standards as its accounting standards. So in the next part, we have the topic to discuss or the problem we would like to discuss. For the first one, we have what is accounting standard that Argentine use. And second one, how were the Argentine accounting standards formed? And the last part that we have what is the current standard used in the Argentina. So we come to the next part of our paper about discussion. For the first discussion, as the first problem we stated before, accounting standard that used in Argentina. In this scenario, the International Financial Reporting Standard, IFRS, are required for complying financial statements for issues of shares and tradable bonds covered by the Capital Markets Law, or companies supervised by the National Securities Commission, NSC. Furthermore, beginning in 2018, financial institutions must prepare their financial statement in accordance with the International Financial Reporting Standard, or IFRS, each fiscal year, beginning on January 1st as mandated by the Central Bank of the Argentine Republic, or CBAR. It's worth mentioning that insurance firms are the only public interest business that are still exempt for the IFRS required scope. The National Insurance Superintendency has mandated that this organization begin using IFRS in 2020. SMEs, on the other hand, might opt to prepare their financial statement according to following guidelines. First, complete the IFRS. Second is IFRS for SMEs. And third, TR's FACPACA. And if SMEs choose to submit their financial accounting accounts using the whole IFRS, they must do so in through the unaltered way. If they decide to apply IFRS to SMEs, they will continue to the same manner. So in finally, those business who, due to their features, cannot be classed as SMA and do not function under the NRC or the CBAR, have to choose choices for preparing their financial statement. First, the complete IFRS. The second one is TR by the FACPAC. Okay. Given the mandated nature to the IFRS for some taxpayers and the freedom to select for others, there will be economic activities for which some taxpayers opt to use the IFRS while the others do not. In any event, taxpayers in comparable economic or financial situation will produce financial statement with differing assets, liabilities, and outcomes, depending on whether the IFRS is applied or not. So in the light of recent resolution requiring the implementation and inflation adjustment in Argentina, it's worth noting that both TR6 by the FACPACA and the IAS 29, or we can see as IFRS, follow a similar technique and goal. In such scenario, the quantitative consequence of using one norm against the other is not significantly different. However, when it comes to the display and notes or refill, there may be certain discrepancies that should be considered by those organizations who have the option picking one or the other. So that's all to their choose to use the TR or the IFRS. So because of multiply or multiple standards might be used when generating financial statement, the function of the accounting specialist is critical when it comes to preparing, assessing, and supporting the economic statistics of Argentine companies. So if we want to look back or throw back to the why the Argentine right now use the IFRS, we should know with some set of standards that Argentine used before the IFRS. So the next part is the formation of the standard to be used as Argentina accounting standard. So for this part, accounting standards are set by the Argentine Federation Professional Council in Economic Science, like we all know before. And the professional accounting standards are supplemented by rules developed expressively for the companies under the supervision of the central bank, like we know before, or CBAR, and the National Insurance Superintendency. Certain policies made by these two regulators might result in major deviation from accounting standards. So as we cite from the Argentina ROSC Accounting and Auditing Institutional Framework that was released in 2007, published by the World Bank and released by the World Bank too, we got from some point or some aspect on that database and that data. There are setting general purpose accounting and auditing standards. They are part of that and on that ROSC. So and that part we have some point to be discussed here. There are no particular provision in federal or state legislation that address how accounting and auditing standards are established and released. So in accounting and auditing standards in Argentina are professional standards with de facto authority assigned to each professional council for its specific jurisdiction as the part of its general prerogatives as the outline law 220/488. As the result, it's possible that federal standard will apply in different jurisdictions. And the next point we have, in reality, provincial professional councils defer to FACPACA, the country's federal accounting agency, when it comes to accounting and auditing standard. So the FACPACA develops standards which must subsequently be accepted by substantial professional bodies in order to become required, while the Professional Council have the authority to revise the FA-CPACA criteria. In reality, the great major of them have embraced them in unchanged. So in September 2002, the 23 Provincial Council reached an agreement to eliminate any current discrepancies with FACPCA issued accounting standard. The Buenos Aires Council was the only noteworthy exception to this arrangement, notably after 2001, when it opted to approve various statements that differed from the FACPACAs. The next point is about the decision by the Buenos Aires Professional Council to completely accept FA-CPACA's accounting standard and eventually phase out all existing disparities is a very encouraging recent development. This decision will assist enterprises based in Buenos Aires with operation to the province reduce regulatory burdens, eliminate confusion caused by the existence of two sets of standards, and open the door for a better collaboration between the country's two main accounting authorities, like we have now this federal and capital city. The current state of affairs is as follows as the time of 2007. So the first one is since 2006, all FA-CPACA standard or RTs have been fully implemented in Buenos Aires. Two further RTs will be implemented for fiscal year beginning January 1st, 2008. And the second one is as long-term assets were purchased in Buenos Aires in the 1990s prior to default over time. Residual discrepancies will be eventually removed. And the next one is about FA-CPACA's research section is in charge of the standard setting process, or you can call it Centro de Estudios Científicos y Técnicos or CACYT. It's reasonably to open procedure, but is nearly entirely reliant on the pro-creative efforts of a tiny group of specialists. So this standard setting develops standards in collaboration with a consultative group made up entirely of volunteers. If a draft standard is complete, it is submitted to FA-CPACA Executive Board and for the approval. Once authorized, it makes available for public comment at least 120 days. The text is available on the FA-CPACA website at that time. So the next point is about, as the last point of that subtopic, outside stakeholders, particularly financial statement consumers are not actively engaged or sought out. Despite the fact that the entity has large number of accounting professionals, both permanent and invited members, its members are bare from the accounting profession, government, and academia. There is that of engagement from a business sector, as well as user like investor and banks. As a result, the standard tend to represent accounting practitioner perspective rather than consumers. The regulators and the financial and business sectors are contacted, but not actively involved in drafting the standards. So to continuing the explanation of how the Argentina's accounting standard that applied before IFRS that step by step applied in 2012. On the next part of Argentina ROA's C accounting and auditing institutional framework also explain about the part of this, like accounting standard as designed and as practiced in Argentina. So here are the some points to get the explanation and description. We have to 2 points. For the point A, have Argentine GAAP as design. And this point, we have some detailed information about as of May 2007, Argentine GAAP consisted of 11 FA-CPACA issued technical resolution or RTs for related interpretation and few Buenos Aires Professional Council statements. During this time, several of the declaration clashed with the RTs. However, starting January 1st, 2008, these discrepancies will be resolved. Since 2001, Argentina has had two sets of accounting standards, one established by FACPACA and the other by the Buenos Aires Professional Council. So we can make note by first point of this. By at that time, Argentina have two accounting standards that implement in Argentina itself. First met by the FACPACA, like we have described before, and the next is by the Buenos Aires Professional Council. So for the next point of the A part, despite the fact that the ARGAAP has been largely linked with IFRS since 2000, they are much less demanding than IFRS, and financial statements generated under AR/GAAP are unlikely to entirely fulfill the expectation of consumer used to IFRS or US-GAAP based on financial statement. Although there is no official list of variation between Argentine accounting standard and IFRS, local member companies of international audit networks maintain unofficial lists for their own benefit or that their customers. For larger companies that need to raise or borrow funds over a long period of time and are actively engaged in international transactions, including joint ventures, capital investment or a large amount of trade or GAP may be sufficient. The next point is about the following are the most notable difference between ARGAAP and IFRS. A variety of asset, liability, income, and cost recognition and valuation regulation do not comply with the IFRS. Next is about when inflationary condition prevail, financial statement must be restated by the IFRS demands that financial statement be redone in a hyperinflationary setting. The third one is the pooling of interest approach, which is no longer allowed under IFRS, can be used to generate the financial statement of the merged corporate entity in a merger of acquisition and USGAAP. The fourth part is instead of being published as the complete stand-alone set of financial statement, non-listed firms' consolidated financial statements are offered as the supplementary information to be viewed in connection with the parent company's financial statement. And the last sub-point of this, in the note of the financial statement, there is a lesser degree of information. So the next subtopic about the A point, we have list comparison. Banks, insurance companies, pension funds, and cooperatives are all subject to specific accounting standards established by their respective regulating agencies. So ARGAAP, as updated by CNV, must be followed by publicly traded enterprises. CNV has created a comprehensive set laws for publicly traded corporations, which apply to both stock and debt instruments. A set of accounting standards based on FACPACA pronouncement with revision included in this regulation. And the last topic of the A part is taken together the present discrepancies between ARGAAP and IFRS are harmful to the quality of financial reporting by domestic enterprises, especially in the eyes of international investors and lenders. And then we come to the topic B of the our subtopic before. We have observed voting and practice. So as the part of ROSC 46 ARGAAP based audited financial statement of Argentine firms or non-bank corporation were examined. All of these businesses were found by Buenos Aires with 31 of them listed on the BCBA. The financial statements were dated between October 31st, 2005 and October 31st, 2006. The evaluation had two main goals. First, examine the overall quality of the financial statement presentation and degree of disclosure. And the second one is identify any probable deviation from applicable requirements. The IGJ provided the financial accounts of non-listed corporations. The audit reports that accompanied them were also examined. The investigation uncovered a total of 98 problems, the majority of which are deviation from the ARGAAP. And the next subtopic is about the main issues arising from the review are as follows. First is there's no cash flow statement. Second, there's a lack of transparency when it comes to sensitive transaction of situation. The third one, other instances of departure from ARGAAP included the recognition of contingent assets in connection with a tax rebate claim and insufficient income statement presentation in two cases to certain transactions were presented as extraordinary even though they didn't meet the definition of ARGAP for such item. And the last is the presence of significant excess of current liabilities over current assets, negative results, and cash flows. And the last main issues is property, plant, and equipment, or PPE, are required to be reflected on the balance sheet at the restated cost net of accrued depreciation and impairment of, if any, under Argentina GAAP. So the necessity to enhance the quality of corporate financial reporting in Argentina in order to fulfill the expectation of investors and lenders is implied by this absurd deviation. Furthermore, they advocate for more stringent accounting and auditing standards to be applied to business with a higher level of public responsibility. Strengthening the corporate financial reporting practice, whether publicly traded or not, should begin with a review of the current structure of publicly traded companies, financial statement, and accompanying notes to identify any gaps in the content and presentation of the statements and notes, as well as the area lacking clarity. Furthermore, it appears that more frequent monitoring of periodic filling is required in order to detect irregularities in the way certain transactions. Events for the new types of transactions have been accounted for. So, at last, the periodic evaluation of the work of the statutory of auditors would be a good complement to enforcement measures taken against the corporation. And the financial institutions are now transitioning into IFRS in compliance with the central bank directive that demands complete implementation of IFRS by 2018. So this is the last part of the discussion session. For the C part, we have current standard used in Argentina. Non-financial publicly listed firms in Argentina have been required to prepare the financial statement in accordance with the International Reporting Standard or IFRS rather than generally accepted accounting principles or GAAP since 2012. Or we can call it local GAAP. The National Securities Commission or CNP is the National Decree number 562 per 9 requiring all public enterprises, with the exception of banking and insurance organizations, to implement IFRS. The Central Bank BCRA, the National Securities Commission or CNV, and the Superintendents of Insurance or SSN are the financial sector authorities with the authority to adopt sector-specific accounting regulation for the corporation they supervise. So CNP resolution number 576 of 2010 lists firms were compelled to apply IFRS. The BCRR communication A6114 requires financial institutions to apply IFRS with the exemption of IFRS 9. Insurance firms use SSN accounting guidelines and seek to embrace IFRS by 2022. So companies that compile their financial accounts in accordance with IFRS standard are required to prepare yearly audited financial statement. In 2012, if ACPACA issued TR number 32, which adopt ISA as the appropriate auditing standard for these entities by reference. Furthermore, financial sector authorities have the authority to establish sector specific audit criteria for the corporation they oversee. The CNV mandates that the auditor offering audit service to companies under the supervision use the FACPACA adopt ISA auditors who provide service to firms regulated by the BCRA and SSN must adhere to national auditing standard as well as the regulatory particular auditing laws. So to conclude our paper, my paper or our presentation to this occasion, we have some summary. As the description above, the concept of this paper, we are mainly talking about the accounting standards used in Argentina. So as we know, before adopting IFRS, Argentina has already adopted GAAP and other standards that were built by FACPA. Yes, and one thing is by the Buenos Aires. So the details of it we already see before. So for the furthermore, the details of what imply in Argentina in before the IFRS, we can see at the World Bank data like the Argentina ROSC Accounting and Auditing International Framework that is released in 2007. So in the description above, the topic of setting general purpose accounting and auditing standard and accounting standard as designed as practice in Argentina already explained. And what on that Argentina ROSC mentioned. And after some consideration within FACPACA or within the Argentina board itself of the making the accounting standard, the accounting standard that applied since 2012 that they start to adopt since 2012 by some of list of company on the Argentina. And in their preparation to use the standard now if is IFRS, like we have now some aspect or some institution in Argentina start to use the IFRS since 2018 by generally, and some institution start to use in 2020 and 2022 in this year. So that's all my presentation about my paper. I'm sorry for my mistake. Thank you for the attention. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.